Hi, and welcome to another edition of Studio 411. I'm your host, Larry Dasilva. Those of you who've watched the show know that in addition to tackling a variety of topics, it's always a pleasure when we can have someone, either a musician or someone who's in the business of entertaining us with music, come on the show. And today we've got a Connecticut radio legend and television legend joining us, a personality who almost needs no introduction. You know him from many stations, and we'll cover some of that territory today. We have the legendary Lich joining us here. Lich, welcome to Studio 411. How are you?
Larry, thank you for the invitation. I greatly appreciate it.
A pleasure. And before we go any further, Lich's website, www.talkaboutmusicwithlich. It covers everything, and of course anyone who's listened to him over the years knows that he is up on everything going on, and we're going to touch on a few things, including, I was surprised, such a extensive jazz background and some of the folks he's mingled with, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Now, we start off here. I happen to have a shot here that I was able to procure, he said. This is actually from one of your more recent gigs, and again, what have you been up to these days? I know you're doing a show in West Hartford, right?
At West Hartford Cable.
Yeah.
Doing a program called Talk About Our Times. Runs on right now it's running Wednesdays at 9:30, but they're going to switch it next month, and I've yet to find out what the schedule is going to be. So
it's not just about music; it's about different topics that you're
precisely, because I've always done interviews with. When you go to talkaboutmusic.com, they're all musicians. The program on CPTV was all musicians. So this time I wanted to approach it and do all arenas: science, technology, some music,
sure,
poetry, the arts, run the gamut, just, everything from.
Yeah, it's kind of like what we try to do in our own way here. I try to mix it up a little bit because, you don't want to get just pigeonholed into this. And at this point now, you're kind of broadening your wings a little bit. People look at you and they say, oh, he's great for concert dates and what's hot and what's not on the music scene. But then they say, whoa, he actually goes beyond that.
Precisely.
As I said, when I saw about just staying in the music vein, but just when we were talking about the jazz, I was like, wow. I said, so there's some of that, and plus some of the stuff that I guess is Lich in his own personal ways. Tell me a little bit about you are, what is it, practicing Buddhist? Did I read that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
No, Tibetan Buddhist.
Yeah. So explain that. I'd be the first one to tell you that I know the Dalai Lama. I have great respect for the guy, but I mean, I know Caddyshack, the great scene in there, but I mean, kind of educate us, those that are maybe novices to this. We'll start with, how did you get into it?
Wow. A number of years ago, I was in the bedroom at my home, and my girlfriend walked over to me and she said, you're empty inside, there's a lot going on in here, but you need more in here, more spirituality. And because at the age of 15, when my grandfather passed away, I gave up everything. I had no belief system. So I was devoid of any belief system. And actually, that's one of the things that the Dalai Lama appreciates if you're going to become Buddhist. You can't just go from whatever faith base you are into Buddhism. It doesn't really glorify that or appreciate that. And so, because at 15, I had pretty much given up everything, just emasculated myself from any spirituality. When I was in the bedroom, my girlfriend walks in and she said, you really need to find something here. And so I said, well, what am I going to be able to do then? What should I look for? Because I have no faith base. There's no higher power for me. I didn't believe in anything like that. And so she said, well, you've always been fascinated with Buddhism. Why don't you look into it? And there's 4 tenet systems, 4 schools in Buddhism. I won't get into the specificity of each one of them. But I didn't really have to look into all of them because I knew that the one that you're speaking of, the Dalai Lama, is what they call the middle way school. It's the youngest of all the four schools.
There's actually variations on that.
Precisely.
That I did not know. So spend a little time with that. That's amazing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, there's 4 tenet systems, and the youngest, which was founded by Lama Tsongkhapa, J. Tsongkhapa. Tsongkhapa founded the Gelugpa school of Buddhism in Tibetan Buddhism. And I guess the best way I can describe that is in the middle way, the final of the 4, in the middle way system, they have what they call the middle way consequence school and the middle way autonomy school. Consequence school is probably most difficult to follow. But the reason being, Larry, is because in that tenet system, it's all about it's more analytical. It's very psychoanalytical. It's very analytical. So if you have that kind of mind, I mean, it fits right into the fabric. You're just woven right into the fabric. You can embroider your personality and your thought process. And they also they're very much into the debate system of it. So you don't just take the teachings of the Buddha and make it your own. Buddha really wanted you to not just take his teachings, to what they call the Dharma, his teachings of the Dharma. They don't want you to just take the Dharma, they want you to debate it, talk about it, question it. So the minute I sat down and found out that it's called the Gelugpa school of Buddhism in the middle way, when I read about it, I said, this is it for me, because I'm very psychoanalytical and I'm very analytical about the way I think about everything. So that was a no-brainer for me. And then the debate is interesting because I always liked curiosity or questioning or taking something that is of the root text, but saying, okay, why is this the root text? And really break it down. And so it was no thought to it. So I found a center that was a Gelugpa Tibetan Buddhist center, and I went for one night. I happened to go on a Wednesday night, and I listened to the teachings, and after that,
this was here locally that you went to?
Yes, in Middletown.
Now, have you gone to, let's say, on a trip or a pilgrimage to like Tibet or any part where...
I would love to. It's very difficult to go to Tibet because you can get into China, but to make that final journey into Tibet is very difficult, very difficult, because the Chinese government doesn't let you do that. I mean, freely.
Right.
So I haven't done that. I would very much love to visit Tibet if it would even be possible. But my library of books at home is just overwhelmed with all kinds of books in Buddhism, and I study it every single day.
Now, like in other religions, obviously in the Catholic faith, there's a Bible, or in the Muslim faith, the Quran. Again, is there a book per se that it is part of that, either via the Dalai Lama or one of the other 3?
That's an excellent question. There is. Tsongkhapa wrote a book that's called The Great Treatise on the Stages to the Path to Enlightenment. And we call it the Lamrim Chemo. And that is what would be like the Bible in
Interesting, yeah.
Christianity.
No idea that. So you have a lot of, and again, not people say, oh, he's preaching or she's preaching, if it was a woman talking about this, or to other groups of people. But I think it's good because people need to be exposed, because we have so much diversity in religion. They keep saying mainstream religion is no longer what it once was. I mean, you look around and buildings are being closed and numbers are diminishing, dollars are diminishing, and there's a lot of splinter groups. I'm not going to say which one it is, but I mean, not only here in Connecticut, but throughout the country, you have places where they're renting out facilities, to huge facilities, or building, for instance, even here in Connecticut, we had one that in this neighborhood here that just cropped up, and I'll be honest with you, I don't pretend to understand it, but I mean, certainly they're right. Even in these crazy times we live in, certainly to me, they're right to if they have the funds and the means to do it, hey, terrific. I don't see a problem with it. other than a traffic problem.
Yeah, but I think that was really interesting in summation. For me, it just overwhelmed it took my heart, it took my mind, it took my life. You could feel it flow in your veins. It just spoke to me. And I just said, this is it was just beautiful, just a lovely, faith. There's three ways you can follow it. You can follow it religiously, you can follow it philosophically, and you can follow it psychologically. So there's three different ways you can follow it. The great thing about it for me is that it's so beautiful. It really is just a lovely faith, number one. Secondarily, the one thing for me is that I never thought I would find something like this. And we're not allowed to propagate, as you're mentioning about, so you can't preach about it, you can't propagate. But the interesting thing for me is I'll go somewhere and somebody will ask me about my malas, or somebody will ask me about Buddhism if somebody hears me talking about it. And if they question you, you can speak about it. But you can't propagate. So it's not like you can go up to somebody and start, as you say, soliciting.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that's, the old knocking on the door. It's like,
Right.
It's like, I was in the middle of doing something here, it's please go to my neighbor over here. They need it more than I do. So, but, I totally get it. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not a person that is very religious, and probably, who knows? I think it's like the old Moody Blues songs, questions.
Well, thank you for touching upon it. I mean, my heart goes out to you with great compassion for just touching upon it, because it is a very, very important part of my life.
Oh, yeah. And again, I think sometimes not in Buddhism or any faith, it's almost like we can't talk about this, we can't talk about that. I mean, unless it's under that, the George Carlin seven words you can't say, and I think it hasn't gone up, although with the way things are going lately, we may go up to 10. I don't know. We can tweet them, but that's all I'll go into there. But anyway, it's just, I think that it's okay to have expression. I mean, once we lose that, we're in a lot of trouble, So I thank you for enlightening me on that. Absolutely.
My pleasure.
Now, you talked about obviously a traumatic experience, and it was funny. We had a guest recently on who was a similar thing, lost their grandfather at exactly the same age. And that, in my case, I didn't know either one of my grandfathers, but to know somebody for 12, 13 years where you actually can know who they are. You know what I'm saying? As a baby, you wouldn't conceptualize that. And then to lose them, I can only imagine, how traumatic that must be. But then, in those early years, apart from that, what was your direction that you were looking to take? Like, for instance, when I was 7, I always tell the story, I wanted to be a cameraman. And, again, look where I am now.
in front of the camera.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But I'm saying, like, at what age did you kind of say, I want to be this, I want to do that, or I have aspirations to be an electrician or a plumber or a faith healer? I mean, what was it, what and when was going on in your young life?
4 years old,
yeah.
Music.
Okay.
Music.
Yeah.
My father and his brother, my uncle, music, I didn't come to music. Music came to me. Maybe the best way to articulate that. Music came to me. My father would play music all the time, and my uncle would take me to music concerts all the time. But it was the Dave Brubeck Quartet, it was Oscar Peterson, it was Horace Silver, it was just jazz greats. In particular for my father, it was Dave Brubeck that he would play for me a lot. And so that's where I got to hear Joe Morello. So I got my first drum set when I was 5. I actually have some pictures at home. I'm 5 years old sitting at the drums.
Now, why didn't I get the...
I should have brought that for you. There's a real...
Joe Morello, of course, legendary jazz drummer with the Dave Brubeck Quartet, and you wound up studying privately with him. Yeah.
Talk about one of the greatest thrills of my life.
That's really cool. Like we had a guest on a couple of years ago who studied with Dave Von Ronk, who was a big folk guy, whatever. And I mean, that was more as an adult, but still to be able to, be in the same room with somebody, to be able to actually be, mentored, tutored, whatever you want to call it, taught by someone of this kind of, ilk is quite amazing.
It's surreal.
Yeah.
and the way it happened was surreal. But I was 5 years old when I first got my first set of drums. I got my second set of drums when I was 7, real set of drums when I was 7. And then when I was 7, my parents enrolled me in the Julius Hart School of Music. I stayed at the Hart School of Music until I went to college, and then I had a choice to go to Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia. I auditioned at Juilliard, and I had a chance to go to the Peabody Conservatory of Music in Baltimore, and that's where I chose because they had a jazz program. So I was able to go there. Because they accepted.
Baltimore because Baltimore is a great city. As soon as you get there, let's put it this way, no offense to Jersey, but as soon as you cross the Jersey line or Delaware, even Pennsylvania, as soon as you hit Maryland, it feels like you're in the South. You know what I'm saying? And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it like people are friendlier. People are just, I can remember visiting down there, and in those days, they used to have a guy that would come around and read your gas meter, and he'd be yelling out loud, gas man, so like, now you'd be like, okay, get the shotgun. I mean, it was like, we're so like, uptight here in the East Coast. But Baltimore, I can only imagine, probably even from a music standpoint, especially jazz, R&B, probably was, other than New York City, was probably real hip to it in those days.
It was thriving at the time. They had the Left Bank Jazz Society. There were a lot of clubs around where I could take my sticks and walk in. In fact, right across the street from the school, and there was a club. Every Sunday, you could walk across the street, and all the jazz musicians would just show up for the whole afternoon into the early evening and just jam. So it gave me a chance to play jazz outside of the school environment, which was great.
So you had an afternoon open mic almost.
It was indeed. Yeah, that's precisely what it was. So during the week, in my studies, there was a jazz ensemble, and then I was playing jazz at night. Every evening I was playing with a gentleman who I had met down there who was a jazz musician, and he got a club gig and accepted me as his drummer, so I was playing with him. And it was really nice, Larry. It was a good time, but it just wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough. And so I kind of finagled the Ludwig Drum Company to get Joe Morello to come down and do a drum clinic. So they said, well, he'll come down and do it, but somebody will have to pick him up at the airport because he's partially blind, and somebody have to drive him from the airport to the school and then drive him back, and then somebody's going to have to take him around.
There you go.
Yeah, I'll volunteer to do that because he was my idol since my father had played the music for me when I was 4 and 5, and then as I grew up. And my uncle would take me to all these different jazz concerts, but Joe Morello was my idol.
And now, how long did he work with Dave Brubeck?
He worked with Dave Brubeck from 1956 until 1967, the day after Christmas, 1967, and then they got back together again in '76 to do a short tour, and then after that, Paul Desmond had passed away.
Right.
And they did one more gig. I got a chance to see him one more time, but it was without Desmond.
Yeah.
So.
I saw Brubeck one time, and it was actually not kind of a scheduled thing. I was in New Haven for dinner, and again, how do I say this without sounding like a knock, but they used to put on some great shows. I know they still do some things with their different programs they have during the summer, but I mean, this is when you would walk, you'd have to elbow your way through the New Haven Green because this was like packed. And I want to say 2000, 2001, something like that. I had finished dinner, and walked, with the lady that I was with at the time, and all of a sudden I'm hearing Dave Brubeck.
I was at that show.
You were? Look at that. Hey, cousin, how are you?
I thought I saw you there. Yeah, I was at that show.
There you go.
And I wasn't really a big Brubeck fan. I was a Morello fan. Yeah. And I mean, obviously it was my idol. And I was a Desmond fan, not a Brubeck fan. So I would never really go to see him after a certain point. However, I happened to be at that show.
There you go. See?
Yeah, I was at that show.
Yeah.
And so I got him to come down and do a clinic at Peabody, and I met him for dinner one night. Well, when I actually dropped him off at the hotel, the Hilton Hotel in Baltimore, he said to me, "Would you do me a favor and come back and get me before, or would you like to have dinner with me?" He really kind of cut me off. "Would you like to have dinner?" I'm thinking to myself, this is my idol. Of course I want to have dinner with you. So he said, "Well, you come by the Hilton and pick me up at this time." I said, "Okay, great." So I called him. I came back that night and I called him, and he wasn't ready. So I figured I'm going to, wait in the lobby. I figure I'm going to get the typical, But he didn't say that. He said, "Why don't you come up to the bedroom, And he says, "We can sit and talk while I'm getting ready." So I said, all right. So I came upstairs, and he had just got out of the shower, so he had a white towel wrapped around him. But obviously he had been practicing because he had a practice pad and some drumsticks on the bureau. And so he said to me, so he's in the bathroom, he comes to the doorway, he says, "Why don't you do me a favor, why don't you pick up those sticks and just, play a little bit for me?" I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to play for my idol. I'm going to play for Joe Morello, listen to the solo that listen to the Carnegie Hall album. To me, the Carnegie Hall album is, that's the epitome of when the quartet sounded the best, most excellent. So I go over to the practice pad and I said, how am I going to do this? So I played a little bit, and he had his back to me. So he comes to the doorway and he said, "Lich, you'll get a little faster maybe, but it'll be strained speed. But your technique's not going to get any better." And so Larry, I said to him the obvious question, so how am I going to get better? He said, "Well, if you studied with me, you'd get better." Yeah. So after I soiled myself, you know what I mean, and I went into another room and changed my jeans, I came back and I looked at him and I said, "Are you asking me to because I'm just not that's not my personality,
right.
I think you can tell when we first met out in the hallway. That's just not my personality. I'm more humble and I would never ask somebody that." I said, "Are you asking me to study under you?" So he goes, "Well, I take 20 students a year through the world. And I'd love to I see something in you. I see potential in you. I would love to work with you."
Amazing.
So,
now, I have to ask, because I know my wife's a big, she's a big Zildjian. I'm not giving plugs here. You know what I mean by Zildjian, but also she's always like, we go to a concert, a gig, whatever, and the first thing, regardless of what kind of genre, she's always looking at the placement of the hands. You know what I'm saying? Your left hand, okay? Mm-hmm. And that's just the thing that she's gotten really almost obsessive about, but it's in a good way because it makes her enjoy the show. She calls them bangers, and she calls them basically stylists, and so you know what I'm talking about.
I do know what you're
talking about. So even when all these years of interviewing bands, we're not going to say anyone in particular, but I'm sure we could, if we put our heads together, we could come up with a few. They may be good, they may be moderately fast, but you know what? There's nothing like a guy that let's say has studied at Juilliard or studied at the one in Boston now that's Berkeley, very popular, or overseas for that matter. They're tremendous. And secondly, there's nothing like a jazz drummer. I know some jazz people who have very much influence in their veins, and they play with rock bands, and the rock band is better for it, because then if they step off the stage and a fill-in comes in for the encore,
I know what you're saying.
Then it's like, okay, and we're standing there saying, it could be this much. Usually it's this much off, but you can tell the difference because there's just that speed that is.
Well, if you watch Joe Morello, YouTube, go to YouTube, watch Joe Morello, watch Buddy Rich, their technical prowess and their musicality is enormous. Joe's technical proficiency with brushes or his subtlety. He's so flawless, he's seamless, he's lucid, he's fluid. He's still playing, but everything he does, the cymbals are an instrument. People don't look at the drums and say, okay, they think this is all the instrument. It's not, Larry. The hi-hat's an instrument. The cymbals are an instrument. Certain parts of the cymbals are an instrument. The bell of the cymbal, the top of the cymbal, the bottom of the cymbal, sides of the cymbal. Each drum is its own instrument. The bass drum is its own instrument. That's the way Joe Morello approaches. Even when he plays with brushes, there's such finesse. So Joe Morello, when you think about a small quartet type approach, big band, nobody has ever played in a big band like Buddy Rich. Nobody.
I was going to lead to my next question, but before I get to that, a guy more recent vintage, and he's not a youngster either, but then again, to me, I don't know his background, I don't know if he studied jazz, but a Russ Kunkel, who of course James Taylor and countless others, again, very adept, with brushes and things that bangers just have no concept of. But again, James Taylor preaches about him all the time, what a great guy he is, and perhaps he has some of that influence. I don't know his background.
I do know what you're alluding to, because, and I agree with you. You'd stated bangers.
Yeah.
I see musicians nowadays slashing the cymbals. The cymbals are made to be played. There's a certain way to get, or they'll put a spacer and they'll screw it down so the cymbals don't move.
Right.
But if the cymbals don't move, they don't breathe.
Right, exactly.
You want the instrument to breathe. I don't have Joe Morello and I custom made my drum set. So when we custom made my set at home, there's no mufflers on the drums. There's no mufflers on the drums. Why? Because we want the drums to breathe. You want the cymbals to breathe. And there's a way to get sounds out of them. So if you want to play more quiet, it's the way you approach.
Absolutely, yeah. The whole, how you hold the sticks, and so many, like you said, what you're telling me is they're not using the cymbals they're using it as basically an accessory. They're not treating it with the same respect as the other parts of the drum kit.
Yeah, and without belaboring, because I know you want to talk about so many things, without belaboring this, when you play, let's say, for example, you can use your arm, you can use your wrist, and you can use your fingers. Drummers don't play like that anymore, so if you really want to use power, here, you want to hit the drum this way, or you want to hit it this way, or you want to use your fingers. So there's so many different ways to even approach the way you use your sticks on the instrument. Drummers, you gotta.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Veteran radio and TV personality Lich joining us here for the hour on Studio 411, and see, and you thought we were going to talk about rock and roll and all that other good stuff, and who worked here and who went from there, and who got fired yesterday and who got hired today. No, not so much, not so much. There's one shot of him at his craft during the daytime, or perhaps overnight. You did overnights for a lot of years too, didn't you?
I did.
Back in the day, yeah.
I did. It's
one more thing on the music jazz end of it. Top three, I think you already gave me one. Top three jazz or drummers of all time. Drummers of all time. I'll throw it wide open.
It's so difficult to say of all time.
Well, let's go with jazz. Maybe that.
No, that would be to somebody's. That's somebody's taste. That would be
right. But we'll stick with jazz. Jazz.
For me,
yeah.
Well, Morello, obviously, number one, my idol and my teacher and my mentor, and of course,
sure.
Afterwards,
as you said, he was like family to you.
He was like family to me. Yeah. You know what? That's so well said. So well said. When you think about somebody who was your idol, then became your teacher, then became family. I mean, in every part of your life, from the time you were a child to the time you're an adult, that's a phenomenon.
Yeah.
You know.
What about 2 and 3 on the list?
Yeah, I'd say for me, Morello and Buddy Rich 1 and 2. Third, that would be
Because I love Gene Krupa, but I know that he had so many issues with either drugs and or alcoholism that, there's a famous clip again on YouTube, to quote something you said earlier, where it's the two of them. I think it might have been in a mid to late 60s Sammy Davis show that he had. And again, the two of them. But again, it's almost like watching the young fireballer and Grover Cleveland, who's at the tail end of his career. He just, I'm not saying he had lost a little zip, or maybe in here just had lost a little bit of heart. I don't know, but it was still great to see them. But yeah, Rich was like.
Nobody kicked the big band or pushed
I'm sure you'd watch, and again for. Guys like me, it was maybe on a Friday or a rerun when they used to air them on Saturday, late night before Saturday Night Live, when Carson came on. And as a kid that played the trumpet and French horn in junior high and high school, I had an appreciation of musicians, okay? And to see a Buddy Rich come on there, and of course Carson loved Buddy Rich, And
had him on frequently. Ed Shaughnessy was Doc Simmonson's drummer.
Yeah.
And a lot of people like him. I would then move probably more to contemporary drummers for my third. There's a lot of things that trouble me about the way he approaches, and only because it's very mechanical. But that taken aside, I like Dave Weckls playing.
I'm not familiar with him.
Dave Weckl played with Chick Corea, and then after Chick Corea, he's done a ton of studio work. But he's known for his work with Chick Corea and then his solo work. Great, a lot of.
Chick during the early years, the Return Forever years, the later years.
Even past that.
Even after
that, more the electric band years and the acoustic band years. Mid 80s and then into the late 80s, early 90s, and then he's got a solo career. But I like Dave Weckls playing. It's a little mechanical, but who am I to say? I couldn't even carry these drumsticks, to the gig for him. But I probably moved to him for my third.
There you go. Now tell us a little bit, without going through the whole history or whatever, because we would need another episode, and we're not here to cover X amount of years in 50-some minutes. But again, you've worked at some pretty big stations over the years. Again, what was your first? I assume, was it in Connecticut? What was your first? Was it college? Was it a small radio station?
All of them in Connecticut.
So what was the first one?
CCC was my first.
Really? Okay.
CCC was my first. PLR.
Now, PLR, that was, I just read something where, they all say, we all do it as, back in the day. This was the PLR that a lot of folks our age and older, like, majored Jones for. If you go and read articles online, folks that go back to even folks maybe pre-Lich that really just miss it terribly. I'm even going beyond like a Pam Landry, Smith and Barbara. I'm even before that. They had folks that were just, someday we'll do a show where I'm going to get 3 or 4 of you, male or female, not gender specific, to talk about, the old days of radio in Connecticut. And so many of them used to sometimes branch off and go to New York, Philadelphia, someone, my wife knew a guy named Jack Becker. He was all over the place, and again, it's just trying to make an honest living.
I was very fortunate to be able to always stay in Connecticut. Very blessed and very fortunate. That's because of the listeners and of the people who hired me. They saw my potential. They saw what I could bring to the radio station, but they saw the future in me. They saw what I could do in the afternoons it was always, it's never about me, Larry. Never was about me. It was always about the company that hired you, or in the beginning of my career, it was Bill Nozzle who gave me my first break in radio. Bill Nozzle and Cy Dresner. But Bill Nozzle gave me my first break in radio. And then Daniel Francis Hayden. Daniel Francis Hayden was working at my competition. He was across the street at WHCN when I was at CCC. And And like I said, Bill Nozzle gave me my break, which was an interesting way of how that came about. But then Daniel Francis Hayden, I was still working at CCC, and he said to me, I want you to come over here and let me get you ready. Let me help you get ready to come over at some point and become a broadcaster here on WHCN. Would you like that? And I said, yeah, absolutely. Because I like things that are polished, that have finesse, you know. CCC at the time was more gritty. You know, we were more like, more your street kind of.
But do you think some of that was because, again, one might have been more, and later on became a bad word, but more corporate, so things were done like, you know, the best facility, the best equipment, the best people, or you would hope, and maybe the other one wasn't that they were trying to be bad or unpolished, but it just, maybe the resources weren't there, you know, would they say the comparison between the two stations at that time?
Very well said.
Yeah.
Very well said. Yeah. CCC was more of your gritty street rock radio station. HCN, yeah, polished, and you know, everything was like a well-oiled machine. You know, here was your Patek Philippe, you know, of like watches, you know.
And now, were any of those stations, again, I'll give you one from, I later had an opportunity to work there, but it didn't happen. Again, it was one of those It's a Wonderful Life moments for me. I've told this to many people over the years. Probably the only regret, and I say it only, but not really a regret. It was just a what could have been. You know, I had been in radio, then, you know, the station got sold, I got bounced, whatever, and then had a chance to go work for a station called WICC in Bridgeport. Again, for its time, it was a big AM station, you know, and it was owned by the Tribune Company. So, I mean, there was a lot of money behind that station, and I had an opportunity, sent in a tape, folks, a cassette tape. That shows you how long ago that was, okay? And, you know, and I moved on to doing some other things, and, you know, got a call, wanted me to do a Saturday, Sunday, 2 to 7 drive time, and for various reasons, you know, I couldn't do it, decided not to do it. So really, that's why I say I always look back at it and say, what would have happened? But at the same time, you know, I always say, well, I wouldn't be here talking to you. I wouldn't have met my wife. I wouldn't, you know, a lot of things, because it would have taken you in a whole different stratosphere, good or bad, I don't know. But still, there's always that thing about, oh boy, if I had a time capsule, you know, I could just alter, just to see how it would have turned out, you know. But in those days, again, there's some big money in those stations. I mean, there were people that would even like come from New York to work in some of those stations, you know, to fill in, whatever, because they were, oh yeah, we need somebody down here in Bridgeport, or somebody perhaps in New Haven. Now it's all corporate, all right, but now you're hearing two of the same shows on 3 stations in one state. I mean, it's like, where is radio gone now? And I'm careful to ask, because you're still involved with it to a certain degree, and I still have aspirations of perhaps doing something of that ilk, but it's a far cry from what it was when we were growing up.
You'll even hear somebody who is working in Boston who will do 6+ shows, 7+ shows on 7 different radio stations across the country. He'll just do it all from one studio in Boston.
Yeah.
It's not even local anymore.
Yeah.
And see, that's...
So they're like the Steve Harvey of radio, only they're not getting paid what Steve's getting paid to do his 7 television shows that he has. But you know what I mean? I get what you're saying. Yeah. Oh, and the pay. You know, again, as I told you, I had a meeting with a mutual acquaintance recently, and it was like, you know, it's wow, you know, you might as well flip burgers in some of these than some of these places, and it's sad. It really is. So it will lead into the next point. Is the state of media, radio, TV, we'll throw in now podcasts, you know, the digital age, are things better now? I'm going to say probably not, based on that comment you made. Are things better, or are they better in certain ways? We'll start with opportunities. You would think there's more opportunities now than there were back in our day. However, the pay and the benefits, and I don't mean medical, I mean the potential to advance seems to be at a low ebb. At least that's the way I see it.
I'm suspect that there's not a lot of opportunity anymore. Let's say, for example, if we go back to my time at HCN, or my time, first and foremost, it was never about me. I was fortunate that the Bill Nozzles, that the Daniel Francis Haydens, that the Jim Champlins, Jim Champlin was the vice president of Beck Ross when I came over to HCN. And he said, whatever it takes to get Lich from CCC over here, get him. And he told the late Boyd Arnold that. And Boyd Arnold, again, a great general manager to work for. Jim Champlin the vice president of Beck Ross, never would come into the building without coming upstairs to say hello and shake your hand and give you a hug. And even while I was on the air, I don't want to take up, I know how you are about your show, I mean, you're like obsessive compulsive and anal retentive and type A.
It's like a mother in the kitchen. The sauces, everything is going. The plates are flying through the air, and you're like probably like that in the studio, like, but okay, yeah, thank you, goodbye.
Yeah, because I'm so focused, it's so, but it was never. The love affair, Larry, that I always had, and I'm so blessed and fortunate and privileged and honored to have the love affair with the listening audience on radio, the television audience on TV, when we did CPTV. It was a love affair. So I would have done what I did back then. I would have done that anyway. But the listeners gave me a precious gift. And that precious gift was their friendship.
I have a listener story to tell you, and I should have led the show off with this, but I forgot. Sometimes you're the executive coming in, and I've got like 20,000 things going through my head. I probably hold the Lich record for the quickest answer in the history of Lichdom, okay? And you want to know what that was?
Please.
About 4 or 5, I'm going to say 4 or 5, that must be 5 or 6 years ago. You used to, when you were on JMJ, and I was working somewhere at the time and was fortunate after 3:30 or 4 to be on the road. And your music and what you played stood out to me more than some of the competition. You used to have this thing where you would have the little contest where you'd have a snippet of music, and then people would call, and you thank, Joe Blow from Torrington and so-and-so from Cheshire, and go down this whole litany, which I'd be like, oh my God, he's writing all these people's names. I think I guessed it in, it was my old flip phone. I'm going to say probably really in 3 seconds, but I'll say 5. And you go to me, JMJ, and I gave you the answer, and you go, and there was a pause, and you go, how, like literally, like how in God's name, or how in Buddha's name, now that I know a little bit. How in Buddha's name did you get that? And it was, Larry from such and such, okay? And once I tell you, I don't pretend. If you don't remember, that's cool. You played Richie Havens' Here Comes the Sun.
I do remember that. I do remember playing that.
And I called you, and it was like, name that tune. The music, because there was a lot of, kind of subtle bongo drums going on, and Richie, going crazy the way he used to play the guitar, in my head. And I got it in like 4 seconds. He goes, how did you get it? We didn't even get to the lyric yet. So that's my Lich story.
And how did you know it then? You have to tell me how you knew it.
No, I knew it because I knew the song. I knew the record. I wasn't like probably one of, 1,000 people that didn't just know the Harrison or Beatles version. Harrison later did it acoustically or whatever. But, I knew the Richie Havens one, because just like I knew the Stevie Wonder, We Can Work It Out. I mean, there were such outstanding interpretations, again, partly because of my love of music and also
it has to be about
playing music,
yeah.
Because those two songs, and I could name probably hundreds more if I really put, pen to paper, but it was that, and I never forgot that, and not ever thinking I'd have the chance to meet you or have you on the program, but I remember you were just like, you were utterly dumbfounded.
Well, first of all, first and foremost, the pleasure is entirely all mine to be here. I mean, I meant that in the beginning. I'm most grateful to you. My sincere and utmost and deep gratitude to you to invite me here.
Oh, our pleasure, our pleasure.
And that goes back to what we were just saying about, so now you know that connection, because when you called in, they gave me, the listeners always gave me a precious gift, and that was their friendship. And that gift is something that you have to cherish and treasure. And always realize that without the Bill Nozzles and without the Daniel Francis Haydens or the Jim Champlins or without the Boyd Arnolds or without the radio station having that desire to have you as a broadcaster, and without the audience and without the music and without the concert scene and without the radio signal or the television signal, but first and foremost, without somebody saying, we want you on our team, and then without the audience giving you their love and their affection, and that's the truth. I'm not speaking from here, I'm speaking from here. Without I really believe, and I truly believe this with a capital T, that was a love and affection. We had a love affair. We really always had a love affair on each and every station, and even on television. And so when you have that, that's something that you gotta hold very dear. So
the great Lich here joining us for the hour. What little we have left of it, we could go on forever, but he's joining us here on Studio 411 today. Let's talk a little bit about, and again, I know it well from years. I don't know how it started, how it potentially might have ended, but again, you are very much well known for, in all your program stops, for working with promoter Jim Koplik on what a lot of us would always like. I think it was on Wednesdays or Fridays, maybe it varied, and it was the concert scene. You know, this is pre-internet, let me find it. Oh, look, I'm getting an email on my phone. I mean, we had to go to guys like you, and I'm sure there were others, but when you get a promoter like Koplik, and you guys did that for a long time.
We did. Yeah,
and how did that start? I mean, did you like bump into each other and say, hey, you ought to come on and
he actually was doing the show first with, when you were talking about the PLR of an age.
The golden days, as many veterans refer to it.
Of an age. At the time, the late great Stone Man was working at CCC, and he would sit in the back of the studio, and I would just run the board. I was doing afternoons, and he was doing evenings, but I would just run the board. So Jimmy Koplik at that time was just on the phone, and then we would just put him on hold and go to the listener, and put him on hold and go to the listener. And I would just run the board, and Stoney would sit in the back of the studio, and Jimmy was on the phone. So the very first show, Stone Man was exactly that. And
ahead of his time. Well, maybe not, because really,
well,
yeah, no, that's right. From the Summer of Love on, or if you go back to Kerouac, maybe even farther than that. Yeah.
And he kind of nodded out, and Jimmy was just talking, and I look over my shoulder, and Stone Man is.
He's out. Stone
and
cold.
So, that's good. Remember that one, Lich. Stone cold. So I potted the mic up, and I started talking with Jimmy, and somebody would mention somebody about an artist, and I would know the CD that's coming out, or I would know they're in the studio and who they're working with, and when the album was going to come out or the CD was going to come out. And Jimmy would know when the tickets were going to go on sale and when he was going to book them. So Jimmy and I started doing it. But that was later. Earlier, what had happened was the Rolling Stones were coming to the Hartford Civic Center for 2 nights in November. And I got a call from the Hartford Current, and they had said, would you make a quote? Because what had happened was Luciano Pavarotti was singing at the Hartford Civic Center. And we were told weeks before that it was mail order only for those tickets. Mail order only, that's it. So I had already built up a trust with my audience. And I had told people, oh, you want tickets for the Stones, 2 nights in November, this is the way you have to do it. You have to mail in a self-addressed stamped envelope. We'll let you know when the tickets are going to go on sale. So we do it that way. So I went ahead and did it that way. What happened was I'm on the air and Luciano had finished his concert and we get a phone call from Cross Country Concerts. The tickets are going on sale right now for the Rolling Stones at the Hartford Civic Center for 2 nights. Now, I had never met the legendary. You want to say who's legendary? Listen, I'm nothing, to Connecticut radio as Charlie Parker was. Charlie Parker was the godfather of radio when it came to program directors. And I had never had the pleasure of meeting him, nor did I ever after this one particular phone call. I'm on the air, it's after 3 o'clock, I get a phone call, and receptionist tells me it's Charlie Parker from DRC. And he's on the phone, he wants to talk to you. I'm thinking, Charlie Parker. So I pick up the phone, I go, Mr. Parker. He goes, Charlie. I said, it's Lich. And he goes, listen, I just want to let you know, I know how you are about your listeners. And I'm the same way about the listeners. And they just put the tickets on sale. Well, I just got a phone call from the Hartford Courant, and they wanted a quote to be on the front page of the Hartford Courant tomorrow. Is it all right if I call them back and tell them to call you to get a quote? Because when it comes to music, when I think of music in this area, I think of you. I said, well, I think about you.
Absolutely.
He's thinking of me. So I said, okay, yeah, I would talk to him. And I said, I don't usually talk to the press too much because they misquote you. So he said to me, no, trust me.
That's why he's doing this show, because the cameras are rolling. They can't be, unless we go in and start editing. But in my case, it would have to be with a editing block and a razor blade.
Right, the old days. So I said, sure. So they called me, most certainly have them call me. So they called me and I gave them a quote. And the next day, Jimmy Koplik called the radio station and he spoke to the general manager. I want to talk to this guy right now. So he came down the hall and he knocked on my door and I was in my office and he said, Jimmy Koplik wants to talk to you. Absolutely not. Why? Because I said he betrayed my listeners. There's no way. And I wouldn't take his phone calls for like 2 weeks. And then what I did is I started mentioning concerts that I knew he had coming up that he didn't want to talk about. Well, Frank Zappa's coming and tickets, and I remember this. Oh, it's in December. Tickets are going on sale on this date. And so, he was livid, just livid. So finally he came in one day, general manager came in one day, Milt Anninger, and he said to me, please just talk to him, please. And I said, he betrayed the listeners. That's a cardinal sin, that's just a sin. And so he said, please, and so I picked up the phone and we had an hour conversation. And he said, what can I do to make this up? I said, and he said, please stop mentioning concerts that I don't want to go on to. I said, I'll do that if you do something for
Could have been worse. You could have made a concert that weren't going to happen. So
yeah, there you go. Or give me information.
Yeah, the Beatles are getting back together again at Jones Beach.
Right, mention that, Lich. So I said, well, you make it up to the listeners and I'll do that. And that's why he mentioned, well, let me come on the air with Stone Man and we'll do this. So after the first time that Stone Man had nodded out, and I did the program with him, that's how we ended up doing after that, he said, why don't we do it together? And that's really the impetus.
When I used to hear them, there might have been times where he might have been on the phone, but for the most part, I remember him being in studio. And
it always was after that.
That just gave it a really kind of I don't know, just a intimate quality. That's spot on. We never did it again on the phone after that. But the Stone Man and Jimmy's debut program was the impetus for Jimmy and I.
And then secondarily, we came together, and we did it in the studio, and then took it on the road a couple of times during the course of the year. Or once the Meadows, at that time was called the Meadows, when the Meadows was built, then we would take it and do it in front of thousands of people before our concert was held.
There we go. All right, so much more to talk about, and I threw this up. Oh, we missed it. There was the Lich gar back in the day, what you needed. But again, to be continued, my friend. I hope I know you said to me, I've never been on the other end of the receiving end of the interview. Well, see, you eloquated yourself very well. all here and all that will watch this will say, what a just eloquent speaker he is.
You're far too kind. You're far too kind.
Yeah, and like I said, I have in my breast pocket that memory of having amazed the Lich with my Richie Havens.
I thank your audience for always watching you, but for watching this particular program. And again, my thanks for the invitation and for having me.
Absolutely, and we'll definitely have you back on soon. That wraps up another edition of Studio 411. We thank you all for joining us. Larry Dasilva here, and for Lich and myself, we thank you jointly, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. Have a great week.